Hello. I decided to make an intro for this video. It's a little bit different than the previous ones. It is military-based, but only the first half of the podcast is based on his military career. The second half is on his hobby, which is steam locomotives, full-size steam locomotives. I've visited the facility that he volunteers at, and I just want to let you know that it's pretty cool. And if you're listening to audio only on here, just to let you know, you'll be missing the pictures and the video that I've added to this. So it makes it a little bit better being able to see the video, but that's up to you. And I just wanted to let you know before we continue on with the podcast, and here it is. Hello, this is Jimbo from the YouTube channel Jimbo, South Dakota, and this is the podcast called The Hog House Chronicles. We don't have the logo up today. We have a plenty good background here, and we are we're doing this in the evening. We are in Stevenson, Washington. Had been to Portland, Oregon, visiting some friends, and this is Chief Master Sergeant, retired Pat Tracy, and he was part of, when I first met him, the F-15 unit in the Air Guard in Portland. And so he agreed to do this podcast, which is really cool. And it's not required, but he handed me off something from his stash here to go to the Hog House stash. And the last time I was here, it was Pendleton, I believe, that they sent. So thank you very much, Pat. Appreciate it. And thanks a lot for agreeing to do this. So, so I'd like to we're just going to start off by having you introduce yourself, say whatever you want about your family, your growing up, and you can work your way into and I heard a little bit of it, how you got interested in the military, sounded fairly early, and we'll just go from there.
Well, if this goes with the crew I had that I retired with out at the air base at the 142nd, they'll be after me for not making a long story out of this, which is going to make them choke. So, so I grew up in Portland. I'm a 50s kid. I was born in 55. Grew up in a railroad family, so that's going to come back to haunt you guys here in a little bit. But my dad was a railroad engineer. My grandfather was a railroad engineer, and my uncle also. So my uncle, my dad, my aunt were all born in Havre, Montana. And that's because my grandfather was working for Great Northern Railroad, and he'd started way back in the 20s. So my parents... as I grew up in Portland, the one thing I became aware of pretty early on was airplanes. Okay, you would think I'd be only interested in trains, but that really wasn't the case. At that point in the 50s and 60s, it was Portland Air Force Base was the south side of Portland International Airport today. The Air Guard's still there. Growing up, your earliest memory is probably 59, 60, that time frame. And that kept my interest for most of my young life to begin with. Went to high school in Portland when Portland was just a blue-collar town. With a lot of other working parents that were there raising kids, so I had plenty of friends. In high school, I went to high school, I graduated out of Franklin High School in Portland in 1973. Prior to even getting out of high school, I was already militarily, I guess that's really where I wanted to go. And aviation was what I was interested in. Mm-hmm. So through high school, I had joined Civil Air Patrol as a cadet, Civil Air Patrol, and that would have been, I don't know, I'd have to go back. I don't have any record that would tell me otherwise, but it's probably about 1970. The air base became a place that I was going to as early as 1970, one night a week for the CAP meeting, and which was mostly an educational issue for cadets. From that point, I had been introduced to a teacher at Franklin High School, was also the wrestling coach, and he was the squadron commander for the 123rd Fighter Squadron for the Air National Guard at Portland. And he had me come out. Naturally, the way that worked is, as soon as I graduated, I was off for Air Force basic training. It would have been summer of '73. They did with the intent on Air Force basic tech school for the life support career field. And I better be careful on that because early on it wasn't life support even at that time. And I'll really date myself because it was called personal equipment.
Personal equipment.
So if you're a PE guy, which a lot of people that both you and I know would go, they'd be laughing at this, right? As soon as you say that. But
and you, to interrupt you, are the first one that we've had on this podcast that has been guard straight up right from the beginning, because you didn't have any active duty behind you at all, right?
My only active duty was basic training in tech school.
Mm-hmm. So how was it that you chose the life support career field?
It really had a lot to do with what was available to me. Colonel Bergen, who was the squadron commander, wanted me in operations. So I had a choice. It was either going to be personal equipment or it would be command post. And because Portland was an air defense base with an alert commitment, they had a full-time 24-hour command post, or at that time it was called the ODC, or Operations Dispatch Center. Mm-hmm. And I chose to go into the personal equipment career field, right? The intent wasn't to make a career out of it at the time. It was I really wanted to be able to see if I could get to flight training. And at that time, in the Air National Guard, you could put in for undergraduate pilot training if you had 90 accredited college hours. So roughly, if you had your 2-year degree, you could apply. And through things in life, it's like you come back from Air Force Basic and Tech School where they've been months on the road now. And I had little money in my pocket, and I had a girlfriend, and I could buy a car. And life changed a bit. So I told myself that, well, you just go to night school. And everybody knows how hard night school is.
Right.
And I never applied for undergraduate pilot training because I started going to a community college, Mount Hood Community College in Portland, and a full-time position opened up in PE, or personal equipment. That would have been March of 1974, and I applied for it as an E2, right? So it's very rare in the Air National Guard that they hire a technician E2 into a full-time job. But I was the only person who applied that had credentials in the career field. Mm-hmm. So I ended up with a full-time job with the 123rd Fighter Squadron, and that would have been March of 1974. And I would have gone through, it would have March of 74, full-time, and I did not actually leave the assignment in the 123rd Fighter Squadron until they separated aircrew flight equipment out of the fighter squadron and into the op support flight. So, and at that point, Jimbo, I'd have to end up going back and taking a look at when that actual reassignment popped up. It was meaningless, really, to me. I was still in operations. I'm a career ops guy. That's the way I'd look at it. I was comfortable in the facility. I knew my job well, and I didn't move out of that, which is untraditional for these guys today.
Right.
So I'm not sorry at all for the way the career went. No apologies to be made here. I had loved every bit of the time that I put in. And, I normally will advertise it as a 42-year career, only to be checked by the bean counters that say, it wasn't quite 42 years. And part of that is I went into the Air Force or the Air National Guard in June 4th of 1973. And I retired on my birthday in 2015, May of 2015. And that was, it was, if you looked at it and started counting the days, I was probably 2 weeks away from
right
42 years.
And you went as late as you could, because is that when you turned 60?
It is. The retirement paperwork is dated on my birthday in May of 2015. So obviously it wasn't all me. I had a lot of help here. Mm-hmm. Right. I had commanders that pushed that and allowed me to be here that long, or there that long. At this point, I have to start talking about everything in past tense, but it was a great career. It wasn't all in the life support, aircrew flight equipment career field, because naturally, as you went up in grade, eventually I ended up the hall as the operations chief before I retired, which was I in no way, shape, or form thought that I would ever be there. All right, I didn't aspire to suddenly go that far in my career, 20 years before, because the option just wasn't there. If you'd asked me about that back in the 70s, I said the highest that I would ever go would probably be E7, Master Sergeant. Mm-hmm. There just wasn't available in operations at that time, but life changes.
Right. So by looking around, you can tell that behind us are pretty cool displays, different airplanes, and we're going to get into the railroad stuff after a bit. So when you first got into the Guard at this unit and then got on full-time and then throughout your career, what are the aircraft that you worked with?
First airframe, primary assigned airplane was F-101 Voodoo, F-101B Voodoo in the air defense role. At that point, most of the air defense units had 3 to 5 T-33A, Lockheed T-33A aircraft that functioned as target and support airplanes. And early on, it was C-54 at that time, and then to C-131 for support airplane. But the first primary jet, and that was really my interest, all right, was if it had afterburner, I was in on it. So I didn't need a carburetor. The afterburner that was it. So, and then that would have been 73 to about 1980, 81 for the conversion to the F4C. And we still had the T-33s on the ramp at that point, and a C-130 in there. And 1989, we started conversion to the F-15A. And by the time I finished the career, the Eagle was on the ramp, and starting about 1990 until I left in 2015, and it's still there today. So, and another one which I never would have guessed, because when I first started, it seemed like airframe changed about every 10 years.
Right.
Not anymore.
Yeah, those days are gone. definitely. Well, and when I met you, just to explain a little bit, because the light sport shops weren't large enough to warrant a chief stripe, but there was 92 wings in the Guard, and that included fighters, heavies, the rescue units, and then through the BRAC, like St. Louis ended up going to the B-2 bomber, which brought them in to the combat air forces area with the Guard, the CAF. And we only had 2 people up at the Guard Bureau for our career field to manage all 92 wings and try to get us everything we needed administratively, compliance, and the whole bit. So you had already been named. And to explain a little further, there were 13 chief stripes that the Guard had in life support. And those stripes were distributed between the heavy units, Guard units, rescue units, and they're called weapon system team chiefs. So those people, the units for that type of airplane or MDS, when they had issues, they were supposed to contact the weapon system team chief before bothering anybody at the Guard Bureau. So you were named as the F-15 weapon system team chief, and then some years later, I was named as the F-16 team chief, and then there's one for A-10s, at least on our fighter side. So that's when I first met you, and I'm thinking it was around early 2004 when I was assigned to that. Was it much before that you were assigned as the 15 guy?
On the weapon system team chief side, I'd have to go back and sieve through a couple of decades there to try and figure that out exactly when.
Your questions aren't really the best.
It's a lot of that had to do with timing on taking the F-15 and even in the air defense assigned role and pushing it into a GP back role in addition to. And a lot of that changed at roughly the same time. It was after 2000. So I think it was pretty close to 2004 when that went on. And that's another one that I wasn't asking for at the time. It just happened.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody else thought it was a good idea, and that's how you get there, right?
Yeah, I was approached as well. And for the people that don't know, that the air defense are the units that were mainly doing what more the fighter side of the Guard did at the time, which is defending our borders. So most of the units around the borders of the U.S. Were air defense units. So when he says going to GP, that's when we had more units going to what's called general purpose. So they're the ones, and it depended on the airplane too, what they could do. But like in the F-16s, I know that better than the 15s. They, instead of just doing the air defense and say the dogfights type defense, they could drop bombs. So they'd call it air to ground, those types of things. So there's a lot more missions that the 15s were being brought into. And there were some 16 units that were ADF as well, like the Montana unit, Great Falls, which is where I'm headed in a few days here to talk to a guy over there. And I remember they came down to visit us, Lori and some of those guys. This was before Bob's time. And they came down to learn more of the chemical defense things, which is the ADF units didn't have to deal with. And I'd be the same way, but kicking and screaming into the GP world just for the chem portion in particular was not very fun.
What a trip, right?
Yes, definitely. So with you were able to go into the Guard, which those of us that were active duty and then went into the Guard later really loved the fact that we could buy a home and stay there and do the travel, yet still come back. So do you have any trips that stand out in your mind that, you either really enjoyed, or maybe you have stories that you maybe didn't enjoy? What would you like to share on your travels?
I don't look back at almost all of that time. I can honestly say that, man, I really absolutely hated this. At any point in a career, you go, there are some things I really hate, but apparently, with the way that worked, the early part of my career, was all dependent on weapon systems. So in the Voodoo, they had to qualify the launch rails on that jet for its primary weapon, which we all know what that was. But that was a once-a-year trip to Tyndall Air Force Base, and I thought, man, can we go someplace else, right?
Right.
And the move from the 101 into the F4 offered the unit the ability to change. And there were some pretty far-sighted, some leaders that we had especially on the pilot community, that wanted to not just be a one-mission operation. And with the F4, you could do that. So it changed the complexion of where the organization went because of the airframe. And with the F4, we found ourselves in more places, but we still weren't going overseas with it. The F-15 would change that because its role would take it everywhere. So the stateside missions were all good, and you're right, unlike on active duty. And that was if you go back to why I got in the first place, I joined that organization. So most of the guys out there that had Air National Guard time knew that one of the best things about the Air Guard units, and not everybody in an Air Guard unit obviously came into the organization as a new airman. A good portion of your full-timers on any of these bases in the Air Guard were prior service guys. And they looked at that and they go, why would I not want to go do this? It's more stable. It's more stable for me. It's more stable for my family. The active duty Air Force at that time moved people around more. All right. Statuses and everything that went with the community for 40 years of that period of time. There were lots of changes, especially in pay statuses, and early on in the Air National Guard, everybody was a technician. There was no such thing as a AGR, Active Guard Reserve position. And that is far from the case today.
And the technician meaning actually a federal employee. But we still wore the uniform during the week, even though we weren't getting paid militarily as we worked during the week. Full-time reserve wears civilian clothes during the week. So just to explain, the technician means federal employee. AGR is Active Guard Reserve, and you're getting paid like the Air Force militarily with the stripes on your shoulder full-time. So at that time, it was, just throw a number out there, about 65% technician, 35% AGR.
Yeah, in the 70s, it wasn't even that.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, if you were full-time, you were a technician.
Yep.
And there are the only status that you would be in. And, I had a friend of mine who went to a football game yesterday, and he asked some questions. We talked, and I had to start through the process of explaining retirements and how I got here. And I'm going, God, it's like war and peace here on how you navigate that. And it all ended up here with, I did not plan for, let me put it this way. I didn't have the runway in sight for retirement. I did. I worked up to my last day.
Right.
and I was still answering the phones like I was going to be there tomorrow to solve the problem.
Right.
It was much easier for me because I didn't have to think about pulling the foot off the gas pedal, right? And I'm proud of that. I wasn't going to go into I'm retired 5 years before I go, right? It just wasn't my makeup. I wanted to be involved. I was, and I was good with that. And when I retired, I retired at age 60, which is, I knew that's as far as you're going to go. And I didn't have any regrets either. So, it wasn't a case of wishing it was, I got here when I was out the other side. As much as I loved the organization and as much as I loved what I was doing, I knew it was time to be out on the other side. And you could say, well, what drove you out, the fit test? No, not really. But, I did have a lot of enthusiasm for my last fit test, which there's a bunch of guys I know that'll be choking that I even said that, but it was like, I only have to go over to this finish line one more time.
I went 2.5 years ago, and this is the fall of 2023 right now, and we were obviously starting COVID in 2020, and I went out in November, but I did not have to walk out to my last PT test telling people this is my last PT test, because luckily I had a score in the lower excellent. So with the Air Force trying to solve a lot of problems that COVID caused, that was one thing that they could bless easily. So if you were in the excellent range, you had an automatic pass for your 2020 score. So I'm like, wow, I'm done with PT. So I didn't even have to go through that.
Damn, I should have stayed longer, Jimbo. I could have done that.
Yeah.
But I didn't get a chance to do that. There are probably some other expletive deleted that I could have come up with for that. But I mean, yeah, I know what you're, it's a chore. It's one thing when you're 28, 29 years old. But, things change. In the 70s, there wasn't any such thing as a PT test.
Yeah. I'll just talk with people recently. The standards have ebbed and flowed through the years, changed. Some of those older ways are coming back. We won't even get into it, but some of the things they used to measure or what have you that went away are coming back. So that's the one thing I don't miss is that type of stuff. So with you liking your job the way you did, being heavily involved the way you mentioned, answering the phone the way you did the last, day you were there, did you have much of an issue with not being there anymore? Some guys, with the boredom, some have hobbies, some don't. We're going to get into your hobbies, and that's really going to be kind of the mainstay of the rest of this podcast when we get into it. You'll find out why in a few minutes here. But I've talked to a couple other people where they were so busy and underwater and uptight that it took them 2 years to really relax and settle down. Did you have any of that, or did you just go smooth into retirement?
Smooth into retirement versus regret or change. I mean, there are a lot of things here, right? Everybody's going to manifest this a little differently.
Right.
My wife was younger than I was, and she was also out at the Air Base. And she would have gone another 5-6 years after I retired. But she worried about that, right? She was worried about whether I would adapt.
Mm-hmm.
So they tried to get me interested in maybe, testing the waters as a family support person because I'd stay attached. And I did for a little bit. A couple months, something like that. But it wasn't the same. Okay. When I took the uniform off, took the stripes off, I didn't regret it. I didn't end up having problems adapting. It was, it really had more to do with I knew how long I could stay, and I knew where I'd have to be doing something else. Fortunately for me, and most of the guys that I worked with knew what I did as far as the backstory, and I even had one of the maintenance chiefs who's passed now, that a good friend of mine, that John Rasmussen, who there's some pictures upstairs on the wall with a Locomotive and a couple of guys. He was one of them. Mm-hmm. It was, the transition for me was easier than it is for some. I've heard all the stories, but it may not be because I didn't retire and go, okay, how many times this week can I golf? And that was never in my wheelhouse to look at it like that. Some people retire, which may be more problematic, and because you suddenly find yourself with you come out of what I would consider pressure. All right, the last part of that, there was plenty of pressure. Some of us would say chaotic on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm. A lot of triage, we called it.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of different things. Some we can't say in the air, but that was the process of leaving that to a degree was I don't want to put it. It was soothing, especially the idea of, for the first time in my adult life, I got every weekend is mine.
Right.
Every one. And that was novel, because from 1973 until 2015, I was occupied one of those weekends every month, in addition to being out there full time. And from the family perspective, and I know everyone out there today. A lot of the guys that you and I both know, everybody, obviously, and they're still there. And I really respect that. All right. I know where they're at. I know what they're doing. I want better for everybody there. That's the one thing about the camaraderie that you have in the military that you probably aren't going to have in any other place in your life, per se. It's just different, right? The people the distances that we covered, that may be one of the big things when you and I first met, or I probably talked to you first, right? Before I met you in person. Mm-hmm. But in the 70s, we seldom, the communication distances seem, you just did not do as much outside of organization communication. And by the time I retired, we were all over the place talking to everybody.
Yeah, lots of conferences, and some were worldwide conferences. Some were with the Air Force, some were just the Guard, some were just fighter, and so we had just plain old conference calls, getting ready for some of those events. And I'm sure that's when I spoke with you the first time. And speaking of the people in your shop that and you said that I know as well, the one I know the best is the guy running the shop now, Greg. Used to be a traditional or part-time guy in the shop in South Dakota, and that's the main part of the trip was to come out and pick the farthest distance away, that's Portland, and see those guys. And then you're a ways away from there now, and then I'm going to go through Spokane on the way, Great Falls, and see some other friends. And it's just really fun to be able to do that. But it was, and there's another guy, cue ball out in McIntyre.
Oh, cue
I've
ball.
done 2 trips to see cue ball.
Yeah, that's not fair.
But this trip got delayed a couple times. So I was glad to finally get out here. But just to come out and see Greg, meet his kids for the first time, and be able to get together with you just 1.5 to 2 hours away from the guard base there in the town that they live in. It's pretty cool. And you just really build a lot of relationships with this career field in particular.
You know, you develop a lot. I thought naturally, you know, when you're a young staff sergeant, you think you know pretty much everything there is, and you know what's with the upper management as far as the developing. Right, the older you get, the more involved you are in your organization. You find yourself at a point where you know, especially on the comm side, that you come to a realization about how many other people are out there, and that we all have a ton in common, right? So
And can help each other if we
absolutely,
talk,
absolutely,
and if we meet.
and that part of it, the most rewarding part of this for me. So in all that career, you know, we get to about 2000, and I ended up with a shop that I had not mentally ever thought to myself, now you're in charge, right? Which is maybe a good thing for the younger crew. It's like, you might want to think about this someday, because you may find yourself with a situation that you didn't anticipate. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the rules change. I needed a lot of input from a lot of people. So in the 2000s, you know, in the F-15 career field, the St. Louis guys, I got a lot of help out of Jeff Snyder, and
I did too.
You know, Paul and Tim. We there for a while. It seemed like everybody was back and forth.
Yep.
I saw you coming in on staff assist visits, you know, especially in ORI prep. But nonetheless, it was not just you and your crew anymore. It was you and a whole lot of people around the country that made it all tick. You know, the crew that I've got, everybody that I worked with in the initial part of my career is gone, mm-hmm. right? And that happened way earlier than I thought it would. And when I say gone, they passed away. It wasn't from working for me or working with me. It was. I know Larner will have something to say about that, but you know, when I look at the having the shop put in your lap, and then you have to build a team. It was a long time getting the right complexion of people. All right, and you had to work at it. When you sent Greg out to visit, obviously, you know, I always felt like I stole him out of Jimbo's outfit, but he's still here, right? And
doing wonderfully.
Yeah,
and leading and building team.
Yeah, at one point, Mike Lerner, he used the term, Greg was robo AFE, which was
he
still
is.
You know, it is. That's a good thing. All right.
Right.
That wasn't a slam in any way. You know, the other side of it is, in unit wise, I had Floyd Seatman, who retired as he was senior master sergeant, retired out and took a full-time job in the vault, a straight civilian position, and then he's retired. And Floyd and I are good friends to this day, and he really was the catalyst that helped me get through the 2000s. Right, had him for a long time. Mike Larner, active duty airman, came home for Christmas. It was around 2000 in that time frame, 2001 to somewhere in there. And he was an active duty life support guy at Hill Air Force Base. And he came home going to Roseburg, Oregon. And he got off the airplane at Portland. And he goes, "Hey, there's fighters over there." He said, "I got to go over and see what they do." And, he comes over, introduces himself. And at that point, we hit it off at that point. And then he said, "If you're interested, I'd like you here." And he just retired as a chief. So when I retired in 2015, Mike pulled up into that role.
Mm-hmm.
And, maybe we shouldn't tell Greg. He might, he probably has enough to worry about. But that's what happens to you. As the years roll by, you become more responsible.
Yeah, and we were working hard to get Mike on here, but he just wasn't able to make it. And you talked to him, I didn't, so I didn't know how much it was tongue-in-cheek that he couldn't be here or not.
I invited him out tonight. I said something like, "Get your out here," and he said, "Sorry, I can't do that."
Mm-hmm.
But, he's shifting gears. There's a case there where he had to shift gears immediately into he's a full-time PE teacher at a school in Portland.
And just getting started.
And
so
just getting
pretty
started.
Busy for him.
And the kids are terrifying.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So, it's probably going to take Mike a little bit to get him actually back down to where he's, you leave a pretty comfortable idea of what you're doing into an unknown. And that may be the biggest thing about having to get another career.
With no break.
Yeah, with no break. So, that's not easy by itself.
Yeah, I felt for him on that. No decompression time at all.
None at all. So anyway, on that, people-wise, this in all this time, this for anybody that ever cares to listen to this, that there's a background going to the entire time. So I opened up early and said that it was I grew up in a railroad family. So that had some influence on some things I knew about that most kids wouldn't. I'd been on locomotives before as a adolescent.
Mm-hmm.
So although my dad was not particularly fond of the idea of me having a full-time railroad career. So I would normally tell people today that my dad was not a rail fan. He was, he worked for the railroad.
Mm-hmm. And that's where we found a commonality, because my dad retired from the railroad. He did 2 years in the Navy, but I think he started for the railroad before that at like age 17 and retired with over 40 years. So you and I don't remember the first time we talked about railroad, and I didn't know a whole lot about your family involvement before that. But we made that connection there, and we're making a transition into the railroad stuff here now, because it's he's got some great displays up there, and we're going to be putting some pictures and some video into this podcast that we've done a little bit in the past, but we're going to do it more now with the displays that he has with the airplanes, Air Force, railroad, lots of stories, his dad, and also sons. And we're just going to move directly into that now.
Okay.
One question before that, though. Did you go back for like social events to the Guard, like Finney flights or anything? Or was it just kind of like, okay, I'd been there enough and it's on to the next life?
No, I would go back. All right. I make that a point, especially on the people that were particularly influential that in my life, in my career, I should say. So I just recently was out at the base for a Fenny flight for the ops group commander. I would go out and visit the shop. I have not done it as much. So when I retired in 2015, initially we had set up a deal early on in the it was probably 2010, that time frame, that we got together before we got to the base on Friday morning. Every week we'd start off at having coffee at a coffee shop over near the airport. And, that became a constant for the crew for a long time. And I did that even after I retired for a while. And I don't think they're doing it anymore, but they all still know about it, even some of the young guys. And I don't think it'd be hard to do that periodically. They understood it. I took some heat from time to time from a commander who said, "Hey, you guys, what do you could be in here, but I'm going, look at Colonel." I said, "This is really good for camaraderie and it helps keep the shop together." I thought it was a good deal for the crew at the time, and I never backed away from it. Right. Before it was over with, I think there were some of the rest of the folks in operations that suddenly decided Friday at coffee was a place to go periodically too. So I think it was a good time, and it helped everybody through some normally stressful times. So,
well, you spend more waking hours with the people you work with than you do your family.
Yeah.
And you got to have that camaraderie type things going on, no doubt. And I don't think the coffee thing is going, but Greg has some other things going on there, including, I believe they do like a group PT thing on some Fridays or every other Friday. And so, it's still for yourself and for the unit and helping keep people in shape, but it's also the team building, and I don't want it to sound cliche, team building, but we all know what we're talking about. You work with these people and you need to be building relationships because, I know I've said it before, but my wife and I had talked about being friends with people you work with. And for her on the civilian side, it was like, no, that's not a deal. But, you're in the military, you can go to war with these people. We went to some austere places and friends outside of work. And it can be a little risky, but most of the time it pays good dividends, I think.
I think the best advice for anybody that's coming up in the system today, that if team building is a cliche, then when you find yourself in a position of responsibility, being the person in charge, and it's not working well, you're going to know all about the importance of why team building was an issue in the first place. Because from 2000 on, if somebody said, "Well, do you think you were a success or a failure on how you managed putting a shop together?" And I'd say, if I was grading myself, I said that has a tendency to shift from year to year in there, because it was nip and tuck trying to build that, and it didn't come overnight. I would say probably, when I took over the shop, things weren't comfortably where I needed them to be. When I noticed, I said need, not want, and it was. It was probably 10 years to that point of getting stabilized. Some of that had to do with what was going on. But where I ended up with, you need to end up having a crew that works together. And, one of the things I said to my guys early on, I said, when you come in here in the morning, I want you to want to come in. And when you leave at night, I want you to be happy with that. And it was not a case of, it wasn't, you come in worried and you go out bleeding. That wasn't going to be the way it was going to be, and you did everything you could to keep that functioning together, because you couldn't end up having a good crew if they weren't happy to be there with everybody they had. And that's not a possibility anyway. And,
Right.
if you put, in today's world, 6, 7 people in that career field, that's an almost impossible task to keep that balancing act going all the time. And early on, it was only 3 of us. So it became harder with more personalities, but there was more to do. So anyway.
Yeah, we kept having equipment and responsibilities dumped on us, and not a lot of addition of manpower, and that wore on a lot of people too. But personnel situations within the shop ebbs and flows all the time. And you can, if you have it to where it's about as perfect as you can get it, start counting the minutes of the hours on how long that's going to last. Something's going to happen. But for the most part, if you can keep that 80% line of being pretty decent and not hating coming to work, I think you win then. And because you can't cater to everybody's needs all the time to be deemed as a good supervisor. That's not your job. It's not really possible. But yeah, I thought you did a great job with the people that I've met in that shop, and which was quite a while ago, and up till today. I think you left a good legacy.
I was blessed with some really good people. All right, so on the Portland side of the house, Greg, obviously coming from your place, Mike Lerner coming in the door, Dave West, who was I picked Dave up out of and for any of the guys that would know Dave, you'd think you ran into somebody in downtown London, because Dave's English accent is obviously pretty pronounced, right?
Oh yeah, call sign Buzz.
Oh yeah, and Floyd Seatman, all critical people in that whole time frame. With one thing that happened late in my career was we ended up getting the responsibility of a special ops organization, and I ended up asking Buzz to take over the shop down at the STS. All right, and that was to try and get a shop in compliance.
Special Tactics Squadron.
Special Tactics Squadron, which is completely out of where I came from, right? But I was willing to learn, right? So, and I did everything to make sure that if we took that on, because Chief Snyder had come in from Bureau and said, I need you to do this. Okay, that's what I'll do. Mm-hmm. And, today it's much more, the last 5 years, 6 years. So if I do the math, retired in 15, 8 years. Jeez, time flies. That whole program has changed a ton too. Organizations are still there, but it became more complicated. So when Mike retired, he retired out of, when Chief Lerner retired, he retired out of the operations support squadron, OSF, versus operations support flight. So they did a better job making that work. I hope, anyway. But and me going out there, I was just recently out for that Finney flight, and then I went out again for the assumption of command for the new operations group commander, who, by the way, was early on in the 2000s. I had him in there as an airman, and I had him full time for a while. And
interesting. That's cool.
He went all the way here. He's, I've seen him go up through squadron commander, and he's the operations group commander, a Delta captain at this point. And he's not the only aircrew flight equipment slant life support airman that had gone on to get into a cockpit and fly. So I've had several, which to me I've enjoyed every bit of that, to see these guys push on. If they could go that far, I mean, it's of special interest to me. I went out for that assumption of command just because of that, and I wouldn't have missed it for the world at this point. And I don't go out to the base because I miss it. I go out there because there's a reason for me to go, and I know where it's at. I'm interested in its future, like I am everybody that's out there, and I'll always have that ear. So anyway,
the social events.
Let's talk trains.
Yeah, trains. Yeah, I remember on my side, I remember hearing a story, and I grew up just half a block from the rails that went through my little town of Oak Point, South Dakota. And I didn't see it because I was pretty young. But my dad, at times, had a little suitcase in his hand, and Mom had said that he would walk over to the rails, and the train would slow down just enough through town. He'd go run to the caboose, hop up there, swing his suitcase in there, and off he'd go. So I don't know if he's gone 1, 2, 3 weeks or something like that, but then he was also had been on bridge crew and rail crew, and that's how he met my mom in Wisconsin, because I had an older brother, but my father was killed 6 months before I was born. And when I was about, 2-ish, a little more, my dad with the railroad was working in Wisconsin and met my mom. Things progressed, and they got married, and that's how I ended up in South Dakota. Hence the railroad stories of him hopping on the caboose. And then as he progressed, he did more with bridge crews, and the last, maybe dozen years of his career, I told you the other night that he had his own truck, and he would go rebuild depots, and electrical, plumbing, carpentry, all that kind of stuff. But he was gone most of the time that I was growing up, except for maybe 2 or 3 years, maybe in high school. He was gone all week, and then just home on the weekends. So had that. When you start talking about railroads, because I love being near them when they go by on the rails, and you hear them here in the gorge. On the Columbia River here. And I figured you love hearing those, with your background. So your railroad interests and things, and how you've occupied yourself while you were in the military, and how you stayed that way thereafter.
Well, that was another advantage of being in an Air National Guard unit, and being basically your home station was going to be where you were assigned. In this case, Portland. Right? So, growing up in a railroad family, I'm old enough. I was born in '55, so by the time you hit the early '60s. Christmas family get-togethers. My dad, my uncle, my grandfather, everybody was still alive. And the one story as Christmas wore on, generally after dinner, is there would be a discussion in what would enter into it, but railroading. And my dad, who wasn't a rail fan, all right. He would talk with his brother and his dad, and the interesting thing was that all those conversations revolved around an era in railroading, and that was the steam locomotive. So my dad and his brother both went to work for Northern Pacific Railroad, Northern Pacific Terminal Company in Portland, Oregon in 1940. They started off as laborers. So there was some management down at the Portland Giles Lake Yard at the terminal company that hired these two young guys. And their job was shoveling coal. And because Portland, and this is a little more in depth than most of the non-railroad folks will care to go maybe, but Portland did not have coaling facilities. But that didn't mean that steam locomotives that burn coal didn't show up. All right, so Northern Pacific locomotives would occasionally show up from up north, Saddle, Tacoma, coming down the main line. And most of the steam locomotives west of the Cascade Mountains on all the railroads were generally converted to oil on the West Coast. So, but there were still a few, all right? So in 1940, they were shoveling coal out of a hopper car into steam locomotive tenders. So by volume for our crowd here, that was 25 ton of coal is generally what a big locomotive was going to take in the tender. And they were getting paid 17 cents an hour to do that. All right. They advanced out of shoveling coal. All right. My dad became a roundhouse helper. And for anyone that doesn't know what a roundhouse was, that was strictly a steam locomotive issue. All right. Roundhouses went with turntables and they serviced steam locomotives. And you had a lot of people, right? It took a lot of people to maintain the equipment, the locomotives. Steam locomotives could do a lot of things. Powerful, they could be fast, but they took a large maintenance crew to keep that program going. And he went from shoveling coal, roundhouse helper, to fireman. He went to engine service as a fireman, and then on up to engineer. But before we go out to beyond that, the one thing that this is something that stuck with me from before I was a teenager was both he and his brother on December 8th, 1941, both these young guys, right? At that point, they were still living at home. And Pearl Harbor happened the next morning. They knew where the induction center was in downtown Portland. Both of them ran to the induction center. And because that's what they did then. Mm-hmm. You'd never get an argument out of me about the Greatest Generation simply because of the way things were. My uncle ended up going into the Army. My dad, interestingly enough, had one of the things that went on at the induction center for the physical. They found the X-ray showed a spot on his lung, and the doctor came in and he said, "Son, I'm going to do you a favor." He said, they basically declined him for military service. Mm-hmm. Right. So his brother went off to World War II, and my dad spent World War II in the cab of a locomotive working the war effort, right? Which was that's because he didn't go. Railroads at that time were the lifeblood of making they won World War II. You did it without interstate highways. Right? There were no freeways. So trucking was not what it is today. And there were no airplanes that were really flying from airport to airport. So the railroads did it all. Passenger, freight, the war effort, the entire program. From a kid on, I always knew that. Right? And when I'd listen to those guys talking those stories, they were always about steam engines. Right? And I thought I'd never see it. And, it's because I listened to everything they were saying. And the way they explain, what they described or were laughing or talking about, things that just happen in everyday life in the 40s, right? Or beyond. My grandfather was obviously at it much earlier than that. And I never thought, like I say, I never thought I'd see him, right? Portland, about 1974, we were coming up on a bicentennial, and they had an idea nationally that they were going to run what was called the American Freedom Train, which was supposed to haul important U.S. artifacts around the country by rail.
I remember that.
Pulled by a steam locomotive. And as it turned out, there were 3 steam locomotives that had been given to the city of Portland with the idea that they were going to create a transportation museum back in the 50s. And the city commissioner that was behind that died early in his tenure as a city commissioner. And it never happened. And the locomotives languished at a place called Oaks Park in Portland. And it wasn't a pretty display. They'd been beat up, vandalized in every way you could think about it. But the 3 locomotives, one of them was a locomotive that was owned by Southern Pacific Railroad, which served Portland. And it was one of their big daylight 484 locomotives. And the Freedom Train Foundations, they looked at a lot of locomotives nationally that were still left, right? And this is like trying to find a live dinosaur. It really is, because, at that point, most of those machines had been slaughtered by 1960 and cut up into itty-bitty pieces. But the Freedom Train Foundation elected that was going to be the locomotive that pulled the American Freedom Train. I was early in my career at the base. I knew about it. I had no time to do anything about it. And my interest, obviously, I had this draw that didn't take too long after a few years in the military and out, doing the life support job at the base. About 1977, when the Freedom Train tour was over with, the locomotive had to come back to Portland. So came back to Portland. 1978, I volunteered to do a weekend cleanup on the locomotive so it could go to a national Transportation Day exhibit in Portland. And I met the gentleman who was an engineer, or had been the primary engineer during the Freedom Train, a guy by the name of Doyle McCormick. And Doyle has been a friend of mine all this time. So I kind of like to say I started into a dual career path. One was the military and my real job, and I did what amounted to a part-time railroad job, not paid, but I was around the railroad more hours than most people would think. Right? I didn't burn leave easily, so if I had leave that I could, I was able to make some special trips with that. So that first job of working on that locomotive was 78. And through the 80s, 90s, 2000s, you personally had actually seen that it really wasn't a myth. The locomotive actually exists and it goes places.
Right.
And that was every bit as, one, it was rewarding because I somehow found a way to keep my railroad roots. That was my background. When I was familiar, I wasn't afraid of it. It was interesting to me. But again, my interest really had to do with the steam locomotive. It was American technology of its time at its best, and nobody built them bigger or better. And the 4449, SP 4449, is it's iconic today. Doyle's 80 years old now. So what's transpired here is a lot of the crew I worked with for all those years. So, I 78 through the 80s, 90s, I had my foot in a couple of places. You could find me at a base someplace else in the country, or you could find me with my head hanging out of a steam firing seat on a steam locomotive someplace else in the country. But that's rare mileage. I've told people that you would have an easier time getting a backseat ride in a fighter in this country than you would being able to ride this cab much in a steam locomotive, simply because of the opportunities are so few. So
Right. Yeah, and I had seen. I was with you at the, what do you call it? Where you work, where you volunteer to work on the planes. I don't want to say it wrong.
The trains.
Yeah.
That would be today we call it the engine house.
The engine house.
Okay,
That's what it was. So I visited there. You took me there, but then I'm going to guess mid 2009.
Yeah.
You guys were taking that engine. SP 4449 was pulling a train to all the way to Michigan. You said.
Yeah, Owasso, Michigan.
Yeah. And you let me know, which was great. My dad was still around, but unfortunately he wasn't able to make the trip. And we had a foreign exchange student from Brazil with us, I remember. And so my wife, Mary, and daughter, Deanna, and Marty, and I headed up to Fargo to see you at that train. And that was amazing. And I was wishing that we had a little bit more time to see it. But you did, take us up into the engine, looking around. I found it was interesting also when the train was coming in to stop. I didn't realize how intricate it was, but when you got the thing stopped, I don't remember if there was a comment about maybe it could have been up a little farther or something like that. And I thought maybe it would just be some kind of, radio coordination. Hey, we're going to move this thing, and you're like, no, it's a lot more intricate than that to move that thing. You couldn't just go through the safety deal of making sure nobody's hanging on it or by the wheels. It was a big deal every time that train had to move.
It was all about safety. So in the railroad world, safety is more paramount today. It always had been, but the culture is even more so today, for good reason. I had somebody told me one time it's U.S. heavy industry that moves, and which it is. It's unforgiving. If you get you never, that's why you're working on anything heavy like that. It's never have your hands in a pinch point, things like that. And, it's a different machine. It's not like anything anybody's going to work on. Whether it's a steam tractor, I've got friends of mine that are big into, steam farm tractors, and there's a whole bunch of that goes on down the valley. Mm-hmm. And one of the guys that works with me is, yeah, come on down. He said, I'll have you run the tractor. Okay. Which, I'm going, John, you do this. This is your toy. I'm not going to do anything to screw it up. So, but I enjoy the time. You only have so much time. All right. And for the 49, it takes, family-wise, there was a sacrifice for me to be able to do what I did. And, some people fish, some people golf. Occasionally you'll find somebody that'll say, hey, I'm going to work on trains. But that's it. Where I came from with the family, it was important to me. right? I never thought I'd get there. I'm president for the Friends of SP 4449, which is the managing group. And it's not because, I don't consider myself a talented machinist. I'm not. I'm not a professional locomotive engineer. It's not where I came from. I did spend a lot of time in the firing seat, which in a steam locomotive, you had to have two people, right? In today's world, they'd like to do everything with one person if they can. It took a crew, and I'm pretty familiar from the military side. I understood crew, right? Anytime we took it out, it was you and 8 or 10 other guys. That was the crew, and you did everything.
So what kind of certifications did you get, and what did it take to get those?
Doyle McCormick was a professional railroad engineer. We joke sometimes about, he had a 2-year military career in the Navy, and he was on ballistic missile submarines, Polaris subs, right, back in the early 60s, right? So, but Doyle is one of these guys that was there are a lot of people that have mechanical capability. Doyle is extremely capable mechanically on lots of things. And when I say that, I mean the scope of all these years that I've worked around this engine. I never would have, at the air base, you knew in your career field what your limits were, right? And to find yourself down at the old roundhouse before we got the new facility that we'll have pictures of tomorrow when you and I go there. That was 2012. Up until that time, we worked in what had been the roundhouse at Brooklyn Yard, Southern Pacific Brooklyn Yard, Portland, Oregon. What was left of the roundhouse? All right, there were 4 locomotive stalls remaining, because by 1959, all the steam engines were gone out of Portland, and they didn't need the roundhouse. So it started getting piecemeal torn down, and the last of what was left was what we worked in from 1981 to 2012. Dilapidated, yes, but historic. I mean, I've told people, I said the National Park Service could not pay to recreate this. It would be impossible to do, but simply because what you were working around, right? But in there, we did some incredible things. I never would have thought about putting a 400-ton locomotive on jacks.
That's what I was going to ask you about, because I think you were either in the middle of that or just going to start that process, and you're explaining about putting that thing on jacks and changing like undercarriage or axles or something. Explain some of that stuff. I mean, that is just amazingly heavy just on its own, but then to do maintenance and have people down there doing maintenance.
Oh yeah.
What was some of that process like?
You learned a lot of things. Like I say, one of the main wheels on the 4449 is 15,000 pounds for the two wheels and the axle between 15,000 pounds.
Weren't those wheels like 6 foot in diameter? So you stand next to it, it'd be
80 inches on this one.
80 inches.
So, and even the height of the wheels tells a story. On a steam locomotive, the height of the wheels told you what it did. Mm-hmm. Right? Larger diameter wheels meant that it was a passenger locomotive, high-speed passenger locomotive. So you had a locomotive and tender together just under 800,000 pounds, and it was like moving a warehouse when you were going someplace. And when you fueled, you needed 6,000 gallons of heavy fuel oil and 23,300 gallons of water. and that wasn't enough water. When you saw us in Fargo, we had an auxiliary tender with us with another 30,000 gallons of water, and that's to get you through the day. Mm-hmm. So you use more fuel than you do water, or you use more water than you do fuel. Let's get that right. And when it's hot, it's hot. You know, you've got when you say steam, I think a lot of people say, yeah, I know what steam is like, you know, put the teapot on the stove and it whistles when it's hot. Well, steam in this locomotive would melt your teapot for you. It's because toward the end of that technology, they were the type of steam delivering to the cylinders was what's known as superheat steam, which is 700 degrees. And at 700 degrees, it's not even visible. Right? If it's there, if you come in contact with it, you're done. There were stories in the Navy on ships that were that had steam plants, still steam-powered Navy ships, that the way that they would check in the engine room for a leak in a superheat pipe was a broomstick, all right? And they would run the broomstick near the pipes trying to figure out where that leak was. And that jet of superheat would sever the broomstick.
Oh, my word.
So that's something that you go, okay, I know it's there, but you don't want to touch it.
And it's invisible.
You
could just walk right by there and cut you right out.
If you have a pipe let loose in the cab, you're in trouble. Your trouble is it's really beyond trouble.
Yeah. Well, just going back to the old physics class, you think, okay, 212 degrees, water to steam, but temperature isn't the only thing. If I remember right, the old unit of measure was like kelvins or something like that. But like you said, the 700 degree steam, steam is extremely dangerous, even before knowing what you were talking about.
It is. I mean, the thing with any steam locomotive is they came out of an era when there was no such thing as OSHA, right? If the railroads would never have anything like that today, just simply because it would make on that side it's just too much for them. I mean, if you get up on the side, on the side of the locomotive, you have what we call the running boards. So you had to go up over the wheels on that walkway up there, and we spend a lot of time on the walkway. There's no rail up there, right? You have a handhold up there, a handrail up there, but there's nothing behind you. Mm-hmm. If we did a drawing of what a steam locomotive would look like in the modern world, it wouldn't look like a steam locomotive. And from the safety appliance side, you'd have railings where there aren't railings today. And, it was a different time. But, that's why historic stuff is historic. Why did we fly P-51s and B-17s and, B-24s, B-29s? Mm-hmm. It's not because they need them for the job. It's because they're historic. They tell something about time. And that's really what the steam engine is about. My involvement, my dad was passively happy with the fact that I did that. But at the same time, at one point in my career in the military, they were actually going to hire engineers, which for a period of time in the 1980s that you weren't, railroad employment was going down. They weren't hiring people that way. They would move people from other career fields into the operating side of things if they had to, or retread you. So there came a point where they were actually going to hire, and I mentioned that to my dad, and he was like, not only no, but hell no. It was really worse than that, but it was to say what wasn't for it. It was pretty obvious, right? And we talked about it, and I stayed the course. all right, and I benefited because of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was dual. You know, it's a unique piece of history, and the Idgeon House in Portland's it's really more of a I guess I would. Shrine isn't really the way I want it to. It's a testament to a lot of volunteer work by a lot of people for 40 years that enabled us to build this new facility. And when we built it, what had changed was the city of Portland, which really, you know, they were okay with the steam locomotive at Oaks Park that they owned going off for the Freedom Train, but they were never really behind it. You get into about 2010, and suddenly we had momentum and we had help, and the building was built and the facility finished, and it took about $5 million. And you say, some people say, well, the city paid for all that? And I said, no, they didn't. Their locomotives. This Idgeon House was built on donation, and the donation came from a lot of people that participated a little, and a couple of people that participated a whole lot, which got them to about $4 million. Well, they needed a little less than $1 million to get the facility going. And we had to get out of where we were with the Idgeons. They may as well have been outside at the point that we left the old roundhouse at Brooklyn Yard. But that last $1 million was provided by the city of Portland, but it was provided to us as a loan. It was not provided to us as a.
Okay.
All right. Now in city speak, so to speak, is I don't think that they ever expected to see that $1 million back, because a lot of those special projects like that never accrue the money to pay it back. And Oregon Rail Heritage Foundation, which is the organizational structure today, we paid off the city loan in 3 years. So somewhere in the city bureaucracy side, they looked at that and it was like, oh, wow, okay, how do we handle this? So yeah, it's the operation that you see down there tomorrow when we go there. It's not paid for by the city. It's paid for by people walking in the door. It's donation that keeps it going. It's an operating museum, which means that you don't come in to look at Picasso behind the glass, right? That gets dusted off once a month. Everything there gets worked on. It's a shop. It's an operating shop. The public would rather see something happening in regard to work on a locomotive than to see it just sitting there static. And with the steam engine, it's, if you could see a dinosaur, would you want to see one live, or would you want to, you just want to see it stuffed and mounted?
Right.
Right. So you might not want to see it live, depending upon which one it was. But the intent here is that even today that it's open to the public 4 days a week. 1 to 5, Thursday through Sunday. And it's mom and dad and kids coming in. There's no charge to come into the museum, right? So it's in today's world, being able to go someplace for free, little unusual. Mm-hmm. The only thing that they would see is, we can use donations when you can do it.
Yeah, and we talked about volunteerism yesterday, and we see it everywhere out at the Guard, nationally. Just pick a subject. Volunteerism is very low. Are you seeing any reduction in the volunteers with the engine house? And I figured when you were earning the money to get it built in the first place, was that some pretty big time financial backers with that? And kind of where I'm going with that is sometimes there's more money than there are volunteers, but it's a special mix that makes a project come to fruition.
Almost any volunteer organization today suffers from lack of volunteers. Right? There is, if I look back to the 80s and 90s, we had a lot more people showing up at the Roundhouse on a Saturday and Sunday to come in and work. The crew that I have down there today, or now with I generally try and be there Wednesday and Thursday, all day Wednesday and Thursday every week. And with that, I've got a group of guys. So it's on Thursday it may be 5 of us. On Wednesday it's generally about a dozen. So I get some people 1 day a week. I get a couple of people 2 days a week. And the program would take twice that in regard to how much time it would like. The Locomotive will eat up as much time as there is in life, right? You're always going to be working on something. The crew that I have, one of the guys is a retired physician. You'd swear to God he was a retired machinist. Mm-hmm. He's not. Right? We have a few ex-railroad guys, but not many. Right? But we're all older. So we joke about the fact that it's called, somebody termed it retired daycare. So which is, it's funny in some respects. We laughed at it, but at the same time, it's like there's going to be a point where if you're going to see this stuff move, that it's going to take somebody coming in and spending some serious time to do that, because you don't learn it, and I can't train you in a weekend. Right?
That was what I was going to ask. Say, Jimbo moves out here to the Portland area. I say, I want to work Wednesdays and Thursdays like Chief Pat Tracy. I walk in the door. What can I do, or how long does it take to get me to be able to do anything meaningful?
Meaningful is different depending
That's a bad
upon
term, probably.
There's, a lot of times we laugh sometimes because we have a lot of the younger generation that rolls through and goes, "Hey, that's really cool. How long will it be till I can run it?"
Run it. Yeah.
How about you learn how to work on it?
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, my line anymore with people is I say, look it. I said, if you have expectations, I said, I can't promise anything. And if you show up here, the only promise we have is we're trying to keep it running. We'll show you as much as you can. If it's not giving you enough, I can't fix that. The best thing I can say is show up, commit 10 years. We'll see what happens.
And you can get greasy.
Yeah, you can get greasy. You can get greasy.
Day one, probably.
We'll go down on the tour tomorrow, not even work on something. I'll get you greasy. It does not take much. Mm-hmm. The machine runs on oil and sweat is what it does. Mm-hmm. So, and it's not just to power it; it's to lubricate it. So you buy everything in quantity. Lube oil. Where do I get a 50-gallon drum, and how many are we ordering? Mm-hmm. It takes volumes, and whether you're buying steel or bolts or nuts, oxacetylene, you name it. They're cheaper things to do. Cost more than your golf shoes, Jimbo.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Don't even play golf. You don't want me out there.
Me either.
So just basically a time frame. You have your engine there, you're gonna replace something with the running gear. How long does it take just to get it up on jacks?
We'll probably spend 1 day to get them set. All right. And if we have a chance to put the lift on it, you may be started by the end of the day, but generally you're going to go into day 2 before you get there. If we get into a big project like that, then it's time management. And that's when I end up going to all the rest of the volunteers and saying, hey, we're not going to get here on your 8 hours this week. So if we're going to go from here to there with the locomotive, I need time commitment by the crew. So, and we up our game. So if your normal plan is 1 day a month, or 1 day a week, I'll be asking to go, how many days do you have extra? And I'll take every one of them. All right. Because what you can't do, there's some other guy that they know that would be me, that would be, I'll extend my week this week, but I don't ask them to do anything I won't do myself. Mm-hmm. And but at the same time, if you're going to see this thing in operation, it's not a one-person show, all right? And it's not, even in today's world, it's also not guys. It's when it comes to, if a girl comes in and she wants to work and she's got the time, then it works the same way, all right? In that respect, it's like, if you've got the commitment, you should be here. If you can help me out. And, that's even like when you ask for a lift on a deal like that. I'd probably plan a major operation like that is probably going to be built around a 5-day work week. Mm-hmm. And in the volunteer world, it's like, I didn't say everything we do would be done in your 1 day here. Mm-hmm. And one of the guys, that he coined a phrase that was pretty good about when you get a new volunteer to come in, and you have management above you going, you need more people. You need to get people in the door. You need to get people. And you go, okay. It takes a personal commitment by that person to do that, and if it's only passive on their part, and then his answer back was, if it's going to take me 8 hours to give somebody a 4-hour volunteer experience, and I'm not going to do it.
Right.
So, which I go, yeah, that makes sense. It does.
The time management there.
So,
got the money raised, got the facility built, got the museum open, donations, nothing mandatory, and you were still able to pay back that money in 3 years. We mentioned the train that you took over to Michigan, but you also had told me about the Christmas trains. Was that a major part of earning money to be able to pay that back? And can you explain what the Christmas train was?
In Portland, the train we operate for Christmas is the name for it is Holiday Express.
Holiday Express,
right?
That's right.
And some people will go, why don't you call it the Polar Express? And I go, well, that name's out there. Everybody knows it, right?
Yep.
If you use the name, then you have to pay for the right to use it.
Right.
Right.
Copyrights.
So, hence, our operating time for Holiday Express is over. We've operated that for 15 years. And it's a huge commitment by the volunteers to get there, and not just the people that work on locomotives, but there were a whole lot of other people too, people in the cars and everything else. The typical operating profile was the first weekend after Thanksgiving and the following 3 weekends in December, right? And there's some thought that, we could go beyond, but I said, look at, your volunteers, you're basically in their Christmas tree from Thanksgiving to Christmas is what it amounts to. It's like, how much can you ask people to do in a volunteer world? I'm not working a full-time job.
Especially in the holiday season.
Yeah, if you're working a job, and on this side, that's a sacrifice on the family side too. So we do what we can. We make it every year we've done it. All right. Coming out of COVID, there was we didn't operate Holiday Express in 2020, November, December 2020. Mm-hmm. And you go, well, what is it? Okay, it's steam-powered passenger train. It's a 40-minute ride. Doesn't go fast, doesn't go a long ways. The 40 minutes is really suited for kids, all right? So most little kids, the attention span, anything beyond 40 minutes is you're pushing it. And so it was designed to be a decent short ride, and it had become, there are certain events that become more iconic in a metropolitan area. If it becomes popular, then it's going to be, it builds itself. So 15 years, and we're hauling somewhere over 15,000 people a year, something like that. 2021, which the first year that operated out of COVID, they asked the crew to look at, we need to kind of refill the museum's budget, because remember, it's not getting any kind of government assistance here. Mm-hmm. And losing that year was a big deal. And you weren't even getting people in there wasn't anybody coming through the front door. So they asked us to do 88 runs. So, and that was the most that we'd ever done. And, we got it there. But that's what runs the museum 365 days a year is it's the first weekend's generally 3 days, so it's a Friday, Saturday, Sunday after Thanksgiving, and then the Saturday, Sunday combination the rest of the weekends up until mid-December. And any push that gets you on towards Christmas, and the young lady upstairs that I'm married to would, where I'd be. So
that's enough. Yeah, that's really, really cool. Now in the Black Hills of South Dakota, they have something called the 1880 train. It does a slow run between Keystone and I can't remember the other town, but I'm thinking that's what they call a narrow rail or something.
Well, is that
it's a little smaller?
Black Hills.
The Black Hills
Central
1880 train. That's really the only name or anything description that I remember of it.
I've not been there. I've seen some pictures of some of the operation in South Dakota. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was Black Hills Central, but forgive me if any of those guys catch this, and I'll be getting a letter from the editor. But yeah,
it's a pretty cool little train. The Black Hills, really lives on tourism through the summer and stuff, and that train's going all the time through the summer. I don't know how many engines they have or what they've got for maintenance crews and stuff. A guy that used to be full-time guard was one of the engineers for a while, and I'm not sure what it takes to engineer that, but I'm pretty sure it's quite a bit smaller rigs than what you're talking about.
Normally, I mean, the three locomotives that were originally owned by the city are all fairly big pieces, right? The ORNN, Oregon Railroad Navigation 197, later UP 197 was originally built in 1905. It's the oldest locomotive in the facility, but it was modernized in the 1920s. So it doesn't look like it did early on, but it retired roughly the same time as all railroad locomotives, steam locomotives did in the mid to, it was sometime after 55. Most of them were sidelined by 57. And if they weren't scrapped by 59, it was a miracle. Mm-hmm. But, in tourist operations, like in your neck of the woods, the tourist operations that are out there really aren't very many. There's maybe one or two in some states, all right, none in some others. They're known as tourist railroads, and for a big engine like a 484 wheel arrangement locomotive like the 49, it's really best at going places. It's taking it out and doing 7 miles at 10 miles an hour is not what it was built to do. And ultimately, my routine would be when you see it, you're seeing it on the road to someplace like Michigan and back, where we went all the way across Montana. That's where you learn that Montana never really ends. So, right?
Right.
So it's like you just keep going until you hit the mountains. And there's, that's at its best, it ought to be hauling 15 passenger cars and 500-600 people. And, that's where it should be. And going at speeds like, 50 to 70 miles an hour. So,
yeah, we got a thrill when we left you at Fargo, and excuse me, can't remember if it was me driving or the wife, but one obviously did the driving, and the other one really got to enjoy seeing that thing going along the rails at speed, because we stayed a little longer just to try to catch that, and that was obviously doing it safely, but that was quite a thrill just seeing and hearing that thing just rolling down the rails.
I'd like to say that that literally, for years, most of all of that time, for 80s, 90s, 2000s, every time you got out on the main line with a locomotive, we'd have guys say, man, I love this. I want to do it again. I go, hang on. I said, every time you go back to the roundhouse, it is potentially the last time you take it out. So when you saw us there in Fargo, there is nothing to say that we ever get that act going again. Right? And there have been changes to operate a big passenger train on the main line. That nasty word insurance comes into play, and the insurance has changed a lot in the last 30 years. When we used to go out with the locomotive, the requirement was for a $10 million policy. And now you get out there, it's like you aren't going anywhere unless you got a $250 million policy. And, you go somewhere in there, you got to pay for that. All right. That's when I detest the program of pricing so many Americans out of being able to have the experience. When I can't get mom, dad, and the two kids in a car, in a passenger car, and take them down the railroad someplace more than just a couple miles, because it's so prohibitively expensive for the average family, I said, it's too bad.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the world right now.
Yeah.
And we pay for it just the same way, and whether it's automobile insurance or not. It's just the volume is different. If you had an 800,000-pound Ferrari, they might charge you that much too. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, there's just certain pieces of history that sometimes you just can't help it. Things start sliding away. And Greg and I were talking the other day too, even, what we've met, and in the last 3 months in particular, I've met some people that are just extremely excited about studying World War II military history. And I've loved seeing the passion that you have for the railroad history, and then my dad having been part of that. And then the stories of, like you're talking right now, of it just slowly slipping away. And, it's kind of sad and disappointing, but I mean, what do you do to keep that from happening? It's a big pill to swallow.
Well, some people devote their life to it, right? And when I say that, I'm not putting myself out there to say that I devoted my life. There's some other people that have way more impact than me, i.e. Doyle, all right? And he's just the one that I know. There are people all over the U.S. that there were certain people that were key in making a lot of things go. All right, there's an old gentleman that just passed away here recently that had been an icon in the Northwest. Ran a lot of the smaller locomotives, a lot of logging stuff. And you always knew if it was Harold, you'd always know it was him. If you saw a red polka dot cap, it was Harold. And he, I seemed like that guy was out there in the industry for 80 years. But, he was just always a constant. And because of that, there were a lot of locomotives that got places that you never would have seen them otherwise. And that still goes on today. And everybody can have an impact. It just depends on if that's your interest. I know how I was bitten. It had nothing to do with it, just passively had to say, well, I think I like steam locomotives today. But, I heard the stories first, and I built on that. I never intended or never thought I'd have a chance to do the stuff I did. And I'm eternally grateful to a number of people that got me, gave me a chance to get further and further in. And, it is what it is. I would encourage anybody in Portland or anybody coming to Portland is if you can make it down to the museum and walk in and take a look, it's a worthy look at not what we did, and I'm emphasize that. It's what you're looking at here is American technology and ingenuity. That's everything that you see there. When I walk in, I look at it and I see what's sitting there on the rails is American foundry capability, American machine capability, American locomotive building capability. It was all there. It's the same stuff that built B-17s and everything else. It's what won a war, right? And growing up at my age, I look at what World War II was. It was a huge issue for that generation that most people today have lost they really don't see where that came from. On the street that I grew up on, there was an old gentleman a few houses down the street that had a son that was killed in the Pacific in World War II. The old man never returned to normalcy. He had basically raised that I never knew the kid, right? My parents knew what the story was. They were familiar. And that was basically a time in the U.S. that nobody asked for, but everybody had to participate in. And, from the railroading side of it is my uncle was up in the Aleutian Islands in the Army, and then from there to Europe. My dad spent 18 hours a day during the war effort. Because the requirement was that the war effort was everything, right? That's where those machines came from. What they had to do was they had to move a nation, and that's exactly what they did. Every picture I see of the SB 4449 in a book, I came across one that I thought was startling at the time. It was taken late in the war, and it was on a troop train, because almost all of the military personnel in World War II moved by train, not by plane. They moved by train. And the 4449 was the number 2 locomotive in behind another locomotive in front of it. The picture isn't unique in the respect that, it's a picture of 2 steam locomotives and a train pulling out of, I think it was out of L.A. But she was doing her job, and when you stand next to it, you go, how many people touched it? How many people were, their life was touched by it in some way? I mean, most of the guys on those trains never, it was every day it's a railroad locomotive, so what? Right? But, it did that. And, when you had cubic everything to move, and it had to go that way, there was a gargantuan effort to have to do that. And, it's incredible. And you did it with machines that people would say, well, that's antiquated. Well, okay. There was enough technology there to win a war, a bigger one than anybody's seen in our era. Mm-hmm. So, that's what I respect. I respect the fact that today that, there's certain castings on that locomotive that you can't even do that in this country now. From the steel foundry side. You go to Pittsburgh, you won't find, it's not the steel capital that it was. Right? You may have a tough time. I haven't been to Pittsburgh personally, but I hear there are no steel plants. Mm. So, it's that's what I see. I see a bigger picture of how many people operated it, and what did it do? All right, mm. That's the biggest thing. What did it do?
Right, and on the modern side, you have a family legacy that's continuing.
That would be my oldest son.
Yep.
So, all of my kids, or if they would laugh and say, "What if you asked them, what do you know about railroads?" Right? Or they would say the same thing about, what do you know about the military? My daughter was like, she'd never miss a take your kid to work day at the base. Mm-hmm. Wouldn't miss it. Do I think she's proud of it? Yeah, I do. Do I think both of my sons are? Yeah, I do. My youngest son he worked across the runway at Portland for the airline industry, obviously, and he paid attention. Right? After 9/11, there were people coming to him to ask him what was going on over there, and he could tell them. So my oldest son is employed by what is now known as Canadian Pacific Kansas City Railroad, which is a new merger. It was Canadian Pacific originally they went to work for. But his job is he's the manager for the heritage fleet for KC or CPKC. I'd have a much easier time just saying CP, but lots of responsibility, but he had 2 career paths. and when I say that, I would tell people that my primary career path in my employment, my real career was the Air National Guard at Portland, and wearing the uniform. That was my career. The subset was the volunteerism on the steam locomotive, which is it wasn't a job. It certainly, some people would say it was, but it wasn't a job. In his case, what do you get? You go, well, Justin. So it's Justin is my oldest, and then Nick, who you met here the other day, he's my younger one, and my daughter, Melissa. All right, and I've got my stepkids, Jackie's oldest, Sarah, Katie, and Chelsea. Right, and I have a stepson besides that, James, and they all know this, and they'd all laugh in some form or another. In Justin's case, he went to work for the railroad, so his career path was working for the railroad. But you go to his place and you go, what are you doing with an F-101 ejection seat in your study and a helmet and stuff? On the military history side, pictures, he's out there working eBay all the time, and he's really, on the aviation side, he's an enthusiast. So he's 180 out from the way that I did it.
Right.
So, the kids chose the paths they did. So, and every one of them are quality people. So, everyone. So, in that respect, I don't think I influenced any of them badly. So,
yep, something to be proud of.
I try to be.
Yeah. So, I'm going to be going around the house here. Of course, after I edit this, we haven't gone and taken the pictures and things yet, but they've just got some great displays in the house, military, railroad, and then we're going to go to the engine house tomorrow. And not sure if maybe we'll have a mixture of, you will have seen it by now, by the way, of course, video pictures. So I really don't know what all we're going to get, but you're going to see it in the editing of this podcast. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. This is something a little different than what we've done up until now, but I was very excited since I'd known for many years how much Pat and his family were into the railroad side itself. I was looking forward to this podcast. And doing the military stuff is great, and we had some of that here, obviously, but kind of cool delving into a different piece of history. So thanks for taking us down that road.
It's a pleasure. Any of our crew, anybody that was interested, that obviously you and I have known a lot of people. If they're out here and they want to see the museum, I want to know about it because I'll be there to do that. So.
Yep, and if you just happen to be passing through Portland, you said Wednesdays and Thursdays you're down there working?
Wednesday, Thursday are work days. That's for the crew, and then if it's a non-public day and you're in town, you don't need it to be a public day to come into the place. So, they actually entrust me with a key. So
there you go. Well, yeah, this is great. We've been going at it for over a couple hours. It was great. Seemed like just 30 minutes to me listening to this. I was excited about doing this podcast. So those of you that did just listen to the audio on Spotify, you didn't get to see the pictures and things, but this is on the YouTube channel, Jimbo, South Dakota, the Hog House Chronicles podcast. And do you have any closing words or anything?
2 hours. I'm embarrassed because talking that long is bad. I think some of my guys would say, yeah, Chief could make a long story longer or a short story long, either way.
Well, I found it very interesting, and I'm sure a bunch of other people have as well. So I believe we'll just close her up here. And thanks a lot, Chief. I really appreciate you doing this and agreeing to take some time and allowing me to visit you.
It's a pleasure, Jim. And we're not talking about salves, staff assistance visits.
Yeah. We did a lot of traveling, a lot of inspections together, Air Force stuff. And yeah, it's that was a deal. I mean, it was also a pleasure to talk railroad at that time again to get our brains off those inspections.
Every now and then you had to do something a little different than that, right?
Right.
Okay.
You bet.
Thank you.
All right. You bet. Thanks a lot, Pat.
All right.
All right. Take care. So how'd that feel? Kind of fun?
Yeah, pretty easy. Let's put it that way.
It's two guys bullshitting.
Well, it's you across the table. That is not how tough can that be for me? If I didn't know you, that would be a different story. But
Yeah.
you got me into that. So.
Oh, that was good.
Okay.